place where shadow Pokemon thrive. And the only way to prevail is to get them on your side. Pokemon Colosseum. You can reserve your copy now of this epic 3D adventure and receive a free bonus disc, which includes the key to unlock Jirachi, a preview of the new Pokemon movie, and an inside look at the game. Coming March 24th to Nintendo GameCube. Rated E for everyone.
Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire was released on November 21st, 2002, being the first two games released for the third generation of Pokemon. In retrospect, a lot of people grew attached to the franchise. In fact, for myself, these games were the first games I played from the main series franchise of Pokemon. Although I was too young and I couldn't read, so I could never leave the starting room because I didn't know you had to set the clock in order to leave the room. These games were really important for the franchise, especially the game that came out later being Pokemon Emerald. But at the time, these games weren't without their faults, and it wouldn't be until their future games came out that these issues even got fixed. At the time, the game's release was very controversial because it was the first game in the franchise where it was impossible to import Pokemon from previous generations to newer generations. Generation 3 was the first generation to feel like a soft reboot, as in most of the Pokemon are new Pokemon. Most of the recognizable Pokemon, or the fan favorites, aren't available till the post-game or not even available at all, until future spin-offs came out. This type of thing isn't foreign in Pokemon now, as in Generation 5, 7, and you could say even 8 are good examples of this. Generation 3 was really the first gen where the series took a soft reboot approach. At the time, it was very controversial for the franchise. Many people were turned off with not being able to trade their Pokemon from Generation 1 and 2. At the time, that was impossible due to the hardware constraints, and also the fact that the entire stat system for Generation 3 was rebooted. Basically, if you were to trade in your Generation 2 to Generation 3, even if that was possible, they would be too weak because the stat system was entirely different, and they needed a complex formula in order to import Pokemon correctly. That type of thing could be possible with today's hardware, but back then it really wasn't. So you're probably asking yourself right now, how did people get access to Pokemon if they weren't really catchable in Ruby and Sapphire? Well, cue to Pokemon Colosseum.
Pokemon Colosseum,
which released on November 21st, 2003. For its time, Pokemon Colosseum was a pretty radical departure from the current Pokemon formula. Pretty much every Pokemon game at the time was catch Pokemon, go to gyms, get gym badges, go to the Elite Four, and then beat the champion. Pokemon Colosseum was about trying to catch Shadow Pokemon, which were corrupted Pokemon that were angry and willing to hurt people. They are Pokemon that basically only use the move Shadow Rush, which is a super effective move to any other Pokemon other than its type. The game mainly takes advantage of a new battle style being double battles, which was introduced in Generation 3. Essentially what a double battle is it's a 2-on-2 double battle in a sense. There's absolutely no wild Pokemon in the game, which is either going to be a positive or a negative for you, considering that it does mean you're going to be stuck with whatever Shadow Pokemon you can get, but at least you don't have to worry about random battles or random encounters, and there's no repels in this game either. A lot of the issues that were in Pokemon Colosseum would be fixed in its sequel, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, which was released a few years later, and in my opinion XD is the better game than Colosseum because it fixes most of the issues that the game has. However, that game will get its own retrospective. I will say one thing about the game, it's definitely way more difficult than most Pokemon games out there, and I don't think I realized it as a kid. Maybe it's the fact that Pokemon games have gotten easier over time after every generation in the modern day, but this game definitely forces you to grind or, use cheats if whoever, what type of person you are. And especially for the final boss, there's some steep level gaps at times in this game. And I think the developers, Genius Sonority, realized this later on because it was improved a lot better in the sequel. I forgot to mention that this game isn't developed by Game Freak at all, it's developed by Genius Sonority. They are basically in charge of developing the Pokemon spin-offs. And it kinda sucks because they used to make a lot of spin-offs for Pokemon, but the last Pokemon game that they created was in 2015. And I really hope Game Freak gives them a chance and allow them to make a sequel to like XD or Colosseum, because those games are really good. I really like the universe and the world building that the region has to offer. It's really refreshing as far as Pokemon normally goes. Pokemon normally likes to play it really safe, so I remember even as a kid being enthralled by the region in this game. Most of the things in this game are huge departures from the norms of Pokemon. They take slight differences to what Pokemon would normally do here and there. I mean, there's literally a character that just dances and does the moonwalk in the game. Going back to the game's difficulty, another reason why the game is considered really difficult is that the game requires you to catch and purify Shadow Pokemon in order to use them like regular Pokemon. The cast of Pokemon that you can catch in this game are pretty limited, which like I said can be either a good thing or a bad thing because it will force you to use Pokemon you probably would never use before, but if you decide not to catch any of the Shadow Pokemon, your team will be extremely lacking because like I said, there's no wild Pokemon. You pretty much are given what you can get. And if you fail to catch any Shadow Pokemon, which only a few exceptions like boss trainers, you're basically screwed. You lost your chance of 100% in the game, and you have to restart to your save point. I will say this too, the bosses in this game don't mess around at all. A lot of the bosses will utilize tactics that most Pokemon games don't even push to such an effect. For example, one of the earliest and harder bosses in the game, in my opinion, is this boss where they pretty much just spam Earthquake and use Protect. On top of that, they have a lot of Pokemon that have the ability Levitate, which means if someone on their team uses Earthquake, they're not going to be getting hit from it. There's another boss that just uses Attract and Stun Spore to make it so your Pokemon won't be able to attack their Pokemon. There's another boss that just sets up Rain Dance and spams Thunder with most of their team. And the fact that these battles are double battles adds another layer of strategy that most main series Pokemon games wouldn't even have. As a kid, most of the time I would be pulling my hair and hoping that I would catch a Shadow Pokemon as soon as possible, in order so I don't have to worry about them for the rest of the battle. Or you can save the Shadow Pokemon for the very end of the battle, where they're not going to be doing that much to your team anyways, and you can try to catch it that way. I will say another thing, and this kind of continues how the sequel does something better than Colosseum, but Shadow Pokemon move pool is extremely lacking in Colosseum. That's right, in Colosseum, you only have one Shadow Pokemon move for every Shadow Pokemon that is in the game. So, every Shadow Pokemon is only going to be using the same move, and that move is Shadow Rush. It does 90 base power, where it's really powerful in the beginning of the game, but by the end of the game, the move really starts to suck. Usually because of this, you want to get out of being a Shadow Pokemon as soon as possible, because you can't earn level ups, and you do earn more moves over time, but being a Shadow Pokemon can be really limiting, especially later on in the game. Some Pokemon are better Shadow Pokemon than others, but a lot of the time you don't want them to be a Shadow Pokemon that long. In fact, in Colosseum, it requires a lot of grinding to get your Pokemon out of being a Shadow Pokemon, but that's neither here nor there. I know I've said this multiple times and probably will continue to say this, but the sequel fixes a lot of the issues, especially with Shadow Pokemon. They have a larger move pool, and on top of that, there's a lot more team management mechanics where you can purify Shadow Pokemon a lot faster. In Pokemon Colosseum, it's kind of more of a grind. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, a lot of times people are going to have to restart from save points because if you get a Shadow Pokemon too low in health and they end up using Shadow Rush, they'll actually end up killing themselves because the recoil will basically kill them. It really kind of sucks when you're trying to catch a Pokemon for a really long amount of time. And looking back in retrospect, I started to realize the main reason that they made this spin-off was they were allowing the player to catch Pokemon they normally weren't able to catch in Ruby and Sapphire. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green weren't even out yet, and neither was Emerald, so you'll notice that a majority of the Pokemon in Pokemon Colosseum are from Generation 2. That's because in Ruby and Sapphire, you really couldn't get any of those Pokemon at all. Also, don't forget, at the time, you couldn't trade Pokemon from Generation 1 and 2 to Ruby and Sapphire. So, the Pokemon were straight up impossible to get. That's why this game existed. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire was one of the first games in the franchise where you actually really couldn't catch them all. so you needed other games in order to do that. So these Pokemon that are in Colosseum, most of them are going to be Pokemon you can't even get in Ruby and Sapphire. That's why this was such like a narrative left hook for the franchise, because most people were not used to this. Hypothetically, you would catch the Pokemon in Colosseum as Shadow Pokemon, purify them, and then trade them to your Ruby and Sapphire games, and then you could fill the decks a little bit more easier. So that's basically why a majority of Pokemon Colosseum's casts were chosen. It was basically to fill the holes that were in Ruby and Sapphire. Notice the lack of Kanto Shadow Pokemon that are in this game specifically is because Fire Red and Leaf Green was going to fill that hole a year later. I wanted to include a part in this video about the development of Pokemon Colosseum because not many people discuss it. One of the main purposes of Pokemon Colosseum was to be an at-home counterpart similar to Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2. You can tell the major concepts for the game are influenced by other traditional RPGs like Final Fantasy and Persona. You can see this a lot with the character designs, like the main character Wes share a lot of those characteristics of like a Final Fantasy character. People were able to look in the code for the game and they were able to find out that there was a lot of Shadow Pokemon that were originally planned but ultimately didn't make the cut. There was originally going to be a Shadow Kecleon, Minun, Spoink, Castform, Psyduck, Porygon 2, Wishcash, Wobbuffet, Wailmer, Xatu, Magcargo, and Teddiursa. The latter of the two most likely being removed because you can already obtain their evolutions in the game already. There were some removed trainers in the game. For example, there was a Hunter trainer class that was removed. There was a character called Malps the Riddle Lover, and there was a Shadow Grass Pokemon King that apparently was going to have a Chimecho on his team. There's also a group of characters called the 6 Shadow Apom siblings, which that idea could have been used again in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness with the Hexagon brothers, but that's just speculation. Also, I should mention, there's a couple Shadow Pokemon that are only obtainable if you have e-reader cards, which most people probably have never heard of or have even seen, but there was an entire room in the game that was dedicated to these e-reader cards, and if you had these cards, you could get 3 exclusive Shadow Pokemon. Those Pokemon being Shadow Mareep, Togepi, and Scizor. I don't know why they did Togepi and Mareep because you can already obtain those lines through the game already, but Shadow Scizor you actually don't get in the game at all, so that would have been a cool thing to get. But unfortunately most people don't have these cards, so these Pokemon and the e-reader room go unused by most players. I actually forgot to mention that the e-reader room was completely removed in international releases, so even if you had the cards, they wouldn't even work. So the only true way to get them in international versions of the game is through hacking. There was plans to make compatibility for Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, considering those games were going to come out the following year, but it never happened. And considering with DLC and Wi-Fi being more prominent in today's world, I feel like these things would have happened today, but because GameCube not being a system that could connect to the Wi-Fi and downloadable content, it probably wouldn't have been possible back then. And for the final bit of cut content, this morally has to do with what region you lived in. In Japan, there was a distribution bonus disc, and in this bonus disc you would get a Pikachu, which at the time there was no way of getting a Pikachu in Generation 3, and a Celebi, which to this day would have been really nice because there's no way whatsoever to get a Celebi in Generation 3. In Western countries especially, Celebi is a really elusive Pokemon because it's not distributed a lot in the West. In the United States, however, we did get something different than Japan. We didn't get the Pikachu or the Celebi on the bonus disc, instead we got Jirachi, which aside from other events, this is the only way you can obtain a Jirachi in Generation 3, which is kinda strange because you can't even get a Jirachi naturally in Ruby and Sapphire, which is the same generation that Jirachi premiered in. It does kinda suck though for people in Japan, they never really got a Jirachi at all, but at least they did get a Pikachu and a Celebi. Now, moving on to Pokemon Colosseum itself, there is one half of Pokemon Colosseum that is a single-player storyline, and the other half is a battle mode, which I should probably touch on real quick. The battle mode is, in my opinion, the less interesting part of the game, and it isn't required to complete. This mode specifically focuses on just straight-up battling. It's a bit more similar to Pokemon Stadium. but it lacks team building and the charm that I would say Pokemon Stadium had. I'm not saying it's horrible, but considering what Stadium already did one console generation earlier, it's definitely a step back. You aren't given the same amount of freedom to choose your own Pokemon. All the teams are randomly generated for you, and that's pretty much it. You battle, and that's pretty much it. And you can't even battle your friends unless you have a Game Boy Advance link cable with a Game Boy Advance, which is very dumb in my opinion. So ironically, the battle mode in the Pokemon Battle Simulator kinda sucks. It definitely is a step back from previous games like Stadium and Stadium 2, which do it a lot better in my opinion. But that isn't really the reason why I would say most people play this game anyways. Most people play Pokemon Colosseum for the single player adventure. The single player game takes place in the Ore region, a new region that is struggling with dealing with their issues with evil shadow Pokemon being a rampant problem in their region. Also, the growing problem of evil organizations like Cypher. This region has underground crime, criminals, and you basically have to stop it. You catch their shadow Pokemon, purify their souls, and then turn them back to normal. Then you beat the evil team's operations. Kind of similar to a normal Pokemon game, but still very different. It's not really about being the best trainer ever. It's more about trying to stop an evil underground conspiracy with this evil team called Cypher. And while you still have a battle and fight trainers, the overall atmosphere I feel like is a breath of fresh air for the Pokemon franchise. You can really see the elements of Final Fantasy that inspired a lot of this world. I actually personally really like it. And while it wouldn't be until Pokemon Colosseum sequel, again I mentioned it again, you would get to see a more fleshed out and some other sides of the Ore region. What we do get is still very rememberable. The music for places like Pyrite Town, Phoenix City, all those type of places stand out to me. For what's really there, it might not be as big or as expansive as like the main series Pokemon game, but what's there is still very good. So you play as a more of a edgelord protagonist named Wes, and the first 5 minutes of the game show him being a total badass, basically more badass than any other Pokemon protagonist at this point. He blows up the evil team's base, and Pokemon Colosseum did something like that first. Not only that, but you get this Mad Max inspired motorbike with his Espeon and Umbreon, and they drive away to Outskirts Stand. I should mention that a major complaint for this game is that the gameplay is really slow, and I have to agree with that. There's a lot of intense zoom-ins, and the camera angles and the battle system for the fights are really interesting and really cool, but everything just seems kind of slow. Animations feel like they take too long, the game pauses every moment something happens in battle. It becomes a drag in areas like dungeons where I know I'm going to have to fight a shadow Pokemon, so I just spend a majority of the battle trying to catch it so I avoid most of the animations that this game shows. A lot of times too, I try to avoid battles with trainers that I know aren't required because I straight up just want to avoid having to just hit A multiple times to avoid all the animations. Now to transition to the shadow Pokemon that you have to catch in this game. The Pokemon are mainly available from Generation 2. The reasons why they did this was because most of these Pokemon are not available in Ruby and Sapphire naturally. However, not all the Pokemon obtainable in this game are really that great. There are only 48 Shadow Pokemon available in the game, no wild Pokemon, and most of them are really not that impressive. If you want to build a team with your favorite Pokemon, you're more than just going to be stuck with the limited options that Pokemon Colosseum gives you. This isn't always a bad thing. The game is going to force you to use Pokemon you probably would never use in a normal playthrough, but it does kind of suck that a majority of the Pokemon usable in Colosseum don't even reach their full potential until Generation 4 or even later generations. A lot of the Pokemon just straight up suck. Now when you come in contact with Shadow Pokemon, you have to catch it and then purify it, and then in order to purify it, its purified meter has to go all the way down until it's all white basically, and then that means your Pokemon can be purified. However, this process in the game takes a lot of grinding and time, and it's a lot easier to do this in the sequel because they add in features that improve the micromanagement and the purify bar goes down a lot quicker. But the best ways to bring down the bar is just simply walking around with the Pokemon and using them in battle. It's also important to use the call option that is replaced by the run button. Basically what that call button does is if your Pokemon is stuck in Hyper Mode, it allows the Purify bar to go down a lot quicker. Hyper Mode is a mode that a Shadow Pokemon will enter at random. Basically what happens is its critical hit ratio increases significantly, but there's a lot of downsides. The Pokemon will disobey you, they can use other moves at their own will, they can attack your teammate Pokemon, they can hurt themselves, they can attack the trainer, they can switch out of battle, they can use an item that they're holding. I personally don't like having my Pokemon in Hyper Mode. Some do because you get the benefits of the high critical hit ratio, but I personally don't like being in Hyper Mode. I use Call as soon as possible. It does suck though, when you get out of battle, there's no way to put your Pokemon out of Hyper Mode. So if you end a battle and your Pokemon is stuck in Hyper Mode, you basically have to wait until the next time you're in a battle to get your Pokemon out of Hyper Mode. As a little aside, the call option can also be used to wake up Pokemon that fall asleep in battle, so there's actually no point of using Awakenings in this game, but I don't know if most players really know that.
ルビー、サファイアのポケモンたちがゲームキューブで白熱のバトル。ゲームボーイアドバンスをつないで君の育てたポケモンで戦え。さらに全く新しい冒険が君を待っている。悪の組織に捕らえられたポケモンたちを救い出せ。対戦も RPG もさらに熱くなる。任天堂ゲームキューブポケモンコロシアム。
Pokemon Colosseum is a pretty limiting as far as team building goes, but one thing that is possible is you're most likely going to be using Pokemon you normally wouldn't ever use. The Pokemon selection is incredibly lacking, but just use what you can get. The Espeon that you get in the very beginning of the game is very useful. I kept my Espeon till the very end. Bayleaf, I use Bayleaf just for a little bit of challenge. Flaffy for a majority of the game. Flaffy's good because you get access to Thunder Wave, and that really makes catching Shadow Pokemon a lot easier. The legendary dogs are really fun, but they can take a while to purify. And I got Vibrava so I could get access to Flygon, probably one of the best Earthquake users in the game. It's very helpful in double battles. So early on in the game, you team up with this character called Rui, and Rui's purpose is she's one of the few people that can tell whether a Pokemon is a Shadow Pokemon or not. In the beginning of the game, they paint her as some important character that the evil team was even trying to kidnap her. However, the game goes on and she's really kinda pointless. As I've kept saying through this entire video, that this was changed in Pokemon XD. They removed this type of character entirely and they just had a visor tell you whether a Pokemon is a Shadow Pokemon or not. Not only that, but she follows you around through the entire game, even after completing the game. She pretty much serves no purpose to the story after her introduction and just blindly follows you everywhere you go. Even at times gets in the way. There's a lot of probably compilations and clips of her just clipping in the environment or getting in the way of something. Sometimes if you're boarding an elevator, you have to wait for her to get on it too, and it wastes a lot of time just waiting for her to follow you. It's kind of annoying. I know it might sound like I'm talking down on the game, but I don't know how to really say it, but there's a strange amount of charm that is in this game. The bosses in this game especially are drilled in my head even as a kid. Mayor B, for example, is a crazy looking dude. He has an afro with red and white. I never knew it was a Pokeball when I was a kid. I just thought it was red and white, but it's meant to mirror a Pokeball. Most of his entire team is using Ludicolo, and his main strategy is setting up Rain Dance and using Leech Seed to try to wither down your health while healing up his own team with their ability Rain Dish. Dakum is rememberable for being the first boss in the game with a legendary Pokemon, and this is the guy that mainly just spams Earthquakes and uses Protect. So also some of the members on his team have Levitate, so they're not going to get hit by his Earthquakes at all. And you better hope they don't accidentally kill his Entei, because that might happen a lot. Lady Venus is also another memorable character too. She's a gentle looking character from the outside. She's in the media a lot and she's popular in the news. but she's actually quite an evil person. People are like obsessed with her. They like follow her everywhere. They're just, everyone in the Under just follows what she says. It's kind of crazy. And it is kind of weird that the Under part of the game, where you go like under Pyrite Town, that part of the game kind of feels a little lacking because you don't really catch a lot of shadow Pokemon down there. You pretty much just fight Lady Venus and that's it. But the characters and like how they react around her, and like the drama that goes on down there in the Under, like all that was good for what it was. I just wish there was more of it. The main strategy that her team uses is she tries to use Attract and try to paralyze you with Stun Spore and whatnot. Her team is a little bit more on the defensive strategy compared to the previous boss, but it's still a nice boss. I remember beating it as a kid and enjoying it. And then there's the evil scientist guy, Professor Ein. Look at his hair. He is all about Rain Dance and Thunder. Basically on top of that, and using moves like Confuse Ray, Surf to try to wither down your team. He's a little bit of a mixture, I would say, of the previous two bosses, where he's a little bit more offensive, but he's also got some defensive aspects to him too. He can be kind of hard to take down in my opinion. And catching the Raikou, I don't know if Raikou's catch rate is really low, but like I've always had like the most amount of trouble catching that Raikou at the very end. These bosses are probably the most challenging Pokemon battles. I don't want to say they're like the most powerful and overbearing trainers. They're like, Pokemon are so good, but it's the wit and the strategy that these bosses have. And competitive battling wasn't really that big of a thing even for its time in Generation 3. But like these bosses kind of feel like they have the seeds of like what competitive battling kind of shaped up into being. So I feel like this game is like very impressive for that, for having like this type of Pokemon gameplay for Generation 3 for at its time. I think that's pretty cool. The fact that these bosses use weather effects and like tactics that normal bosses in Pokemon games weren't really taking advantage of at the time kind of like really set it apart, I feel, from most Pokemon bosses and games in general. Like as a kid, dealing with an Entei on an opposing team for the first time, that blew my mind, because Entei is a legendary Pokemon. The fact that when you go in the Under, which is like literally an underbelly of crime, and it's just like on top of it is another crime-ridden town on top of it. They literally put this kid who they believe is a spy in like this fence barricade, and they just leave him there, and like it's I've never seen that in a Pokemon game before, let alone for its time. Like the Under was like a really creepy place. As far as like atmosphere and stuff. One of the other crazy things that you can do is you actually can go in jail in this game and grab a key and let out all the prisoners and bad guys that are in there. That's another thing that blew my mind as a kid. You can like literally open all the doors and let everyone out, and there's like a guy who'll speak to you, he'll like thank you for letting him out. Like I said, you're doing it in a Pokemon game. That was crazy to me. So in the end game, once you beat all the bosses and you get to the last one of the scientists, being Professor Ein, you find out that the tower that has been being built since the beginning of the game is actually finished. But however, it is overrun by Cypher and Shadow Pokemon. So then you go to Realgum Tower and you go through a boss rush where you have to fight through all the bosses again, starting with Mirror B, and then you win your way through, fight them all again with their beefed up teams. You battle a few more trainers that have Shadow Pokemon, and then you fight Gonzap, which is basically the guy who you blew up and stole from in the beginning of the game. You blew up his base. And that's why, I don't know why he decided to show up randomly like this, but he shows up at the very end to try to stop you. He has a Shadow Skarmory. If you catch it, you know, you have a Skarmory. It's kind of random that like you would think he would have been like the main bad guy through the entire game because you blew up his base, but this is the only time you really fight him. He's actually more of a character in Pokemon XD, ironically. In the sequel, he does more things, which is kind of funny. Then you fight through another gauntlet of trainers, and then you lead to the final battle, being Nascor. He's the mysterious tall guy that you see a couple times throughout the game, and I won't lie, in this battle it can be kind of tricky because he has one of the hardest Shadow Pokemon to catch, that being a Metagross. Metagross has a really low catch rate. I think one of the lowest catch rates like a Pokemon can actually have. So he's actually kind of difficult to catch. Not only that, but most of his team is actually like really competent, and his main strategy is boosting his Pokemon's attacks with X specials, which are like items that you can use throughout the game. He has a Dusclops, a Gardevoir, a Blaziken, a Xatu, Walrein, and the Shadow Metagross. On top of that, he's probably going to be a few levels higher than you. This is kind of one of the problems in the game where the level scaling is kind of a little weird. It's kind of a little broken in my opinion. And then you find out, plot twist, this actually isn't the final battle. The final battle is right after this. As a kid, this part like literally terrified me. Like, I did not see this coming. This plot twist like blew my mind as a kid. Again, I like had no idea this was going to happen. But if you did the math in the beginning of the game, you would realize that this plot twist kind of had the seeds in the making. NASCAR was visiting the mayor's office in the beginning of the game, if you can remember him doing that. And then you're probably thinking, why would NASCAR go visit the mayor, you know, randomly? Well, it turns out that nice mayor in the beginning of the game, he's actually the villain. He's actually a bad guy. And he does like a little flip and becomes evil. He's the mastermind of Cypher for this game. I'm not gonna lie, he's like a pretty creepy looking old man. Like, even as a kid, I had no idea this was coming. It, in my opinion, is one of the biggest plot twists for a Pokemon game. It just came out of nowhere, for me at least, as a kid. Maybe you guys saw it coming, but let me know in the comments if you saw it coming. I had no idea. Now, if you can believe this, his team is actually stronger than NASCAR's. He's probably 5 to 6 levels higher than NASCAR's team, and he has a Slowking, a Scizor, a Machamp, a Slaking, a Salamence, and his shadow Pokemon is a Tyranitar. Arguably probably one of the hardest Pokemon trainers in the franchise, in my opinion at least. This is mainly due to his technique of using Skill Swap with his Slowking against his Slaking to try to get rid of its ability. If you don't remember, Slaking's ability is Truant, where it makes him only attack every other turn. And, you know, it probably doesn't help that he's going to be higher leveled than your entire team. Also, most of his Pokemon have like setup moves, like his Salamence has Dragon Dance, his Scizor has Swords Dance. He has a Machamp with a lot of coverage moves on it. It's quite a dangerous team. If you got the Master Ball though, which, unless you're like me and you forgot, which I actually forgot in my most recent playthrough, you can get a Master Ball right before the fight if you go back to the certain town, and then you can actually use the Master Ball on the Tyranitar. That's what I would recommend, so you don't have to avoid, you know, just waiting forever to try to catch it. If you're able to beat this boss though, you're pretty much it with the main story of the game. You're done. There is a post-game in Pokemon Colosseum. There's more shadow Pokemon to catch. I believe it's only 6 left that you have to catch. And there's a lot of optional fights that you can do, boss rematches, so on and so forth, normal Pokemon post-game stuff. You know, this is before a time when post-games started to get lazy. This is Generation 3, post-games were still good, there was still a lot of content to do, still plentiful stuff to do even for a spin-off. I will say, in my opinion at least, the post-game has a lot of content, probably 10 to 20 hours of content if you plan on 100%ing the game. However, I do feel most of the content is just like doing the same thing over and over again. You go into a new area, you know, catch a shadow Pokemon or two, and then you leave. And at times it feels like there's just sections there just to stretch the game's length, where you'll fight another gauntlet of trainers and whatever. You pretty much go to areas you've already been to and try to catch a few more Pokemon, and that's pretty much it. The final battle in the game is a fight where you fight someone who's impersonating Wes, the main character. He actually literally has the same character model as you, and he has a shadow Pokemon on his team, being a Shadow Togetic, which for some reason is level 20 when the rest of your team is probably going to be level 60 by now. They probably do it to troll the person who's playing the game, but I really don't understand why they do it. So yeah, be careful not to kill this thing, because it's really easy to kill, but I think if you do kill it, you can just refight him, but it's still kind of bizarre that he's level 20. I should also note that since this is the final battle in the post-game, that pretty much means you end the game exactly where you started the game, which means you truly have been through the hero's journey. Oh yeah, and don't think I forgot about talking about Mount Battle. This will be kind of a ramble, because I don't like Mount Battle. I really hate Mount Battle. It's a completionist's nightmare. Pretty much if you want 100% Pokemon Colosseum, you need to beat Mount Battle, which is exactly how it sounds, fighting 100 Pokemon battles. And my god, I don't like Mount Battle. In order to beat Mount Battle, you need to beat 100 trainers. I'm 99% sure it has to be 100 trainers in one sitting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember as a kid like leaving my GameCube on for hours because I didn't want to lose my save progress or something like that. At least I can remember. I'm not 100%, but either way, doing 100 battles is like takes forever. It takes way too long, especially in Pokemon Colosseum, where the first 30 battles are like a giant cakewalk. It feels really pointless why they're even there, and then like the last 10 battles are like actual battles, and they're kind of a little bit more on the difficulty side. It's almost like I wish they just were it was just those last 10 battles and not the 90 other battles. I only completed Mount Battle once, and I don't ever plan on doing it again because the only reason I wanted to complete it is once you do complete it, you get a Ho-Oh for beating all 100 trainers. Except you have to catch all Shadow Pokemon and purify them, and if you miss any Shadow Pokemon at all during your journey, you're screwed basically. You can't get Ho-Oh. So as a kid, I didn't know the exact amount of Shadow Pokemon in the game. I didn't look back on the internet. Like the internet wasn't around when I was a kid. Like it wasn't as prominent, and I probably didn't know how to use it, nearly as well. So I didn't think if I missed one Shadow Pokemon, I wouldn't be able to get Ho-Oh. I just thought I had to beat all 100 trainers, right? Like, it seems fair enough. But yeah, no, you just get like a stupid item. If you complete Mount Battle, you get no Ho-Oh. You have to catch every Shadow Pokemon and purify them, and I think I missed like one Shadow Pokemon. So yeah, it was a total nightmare. I hate Mount Battle. I never liked doing it. I never did it. It's like the bane of my existence. It's just busy work. And like Pokemon Colosseum, the battles take forever. It's a pain. So basically, in order to get Ho-Oh, you have to beat the main story, catch all the Shadow Pokemon without missing one, unlike me, and then you have to purify them, and then go to Mount Battle, beat all 100 trainers, and then you get Ho-Oh. It's a slow and boring process. It can take like 5 to 6 hours of gameplay just to do it, and I don't recommend doing it. It's straight up like not worth your time. There's better things to do in the game, in my opinion. And also you better have a strong team too, because like the last 10 battles are like really strong. That's just my recommendation. That's my ramble about Mount Battle. I don't like it. I'm sure a lot of other people don't like it. That's my opinion of it. So, in conclusion, looking back, despite all the flaws of the game, this was definitely a spin-off that was ahead of its time. The 3D models, yeah, they were imported from Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, and maybe a model here and there like has some flaws. But the ones like created for the Generation 3 Pokemon look really high quality. And despite like, the quality of Pokemon that are like made today, like their 3D models and like their continuity and stuff, like it feels like this game was actually trying. Like Pokemon like Wailord were like the size they were supposed to be. The games actually looked pretty good, even looking back. Like they were really ahead of its time, spin-off wise. And yeah, there are some flaws in this game looking back, but as a kid, this was one of my favorite Pokemon games as a kid. And this game has like a crazy amount of charm. I really wish they would like continue with this series in the modern day, continue with the region. I don't think they will because the main series kind of invalidates the point of these spin-offs at this point. They were supposed to be Pokemon games for the consoles at home, but I really wish they would release one more game so it could be like a trilogy of sorts, because I really like all the characters in this game. I like the world building. I like the region, its take on Pokemon. I really kind of miss it. So, if you're a diehard Pokemon fan, I recommend playing Pokemon Colosseum, but just know its faults. Like, don't go into it knowing it's going to be like a cakewalk or anything like that. Maybe have a guide with you or something. It's definitely worth like one playthrough, I feel like. It's a good game.
We will get our Pokemon back!
Who will save the Pokemon? Gotta save them. Gotta save them all. You can save the Pokemon, gotta save them.
Some Pokemon have fallen under the spell of an evil organization, and you need to snag them back, make them good again, and train them for battle. Their newest adventure, now in 3D, Pokemon Colosseum.